Now that we know that the GDP is actually not a really good measure of how well people in an economy are doing as a way to decide if this economy is doing a good job or not of meeting the needs of the people in the community, then the question would be, why don't we create some other number? The question is, how do we do this? Because you could say, look, there are very many things that we can measure apart from the GDP or growth to decide if an economy is doing well. We can look at the distribution of income. We can look at educational levels. We can look at life expectancy. Are people actually accessing the resources they need, the food, water, shelter, in order to live long and healthy lives, right? So this then means that when we decide we want a different way to measure well-being, we have some decisions to make about what we will measure, and we may want to include multiple things in that. We may want to include some combination of health, education, and wealth, yes, also GDP, because we want to say, well, it isn't irrelevant if you actually got an economy that's producing goods and services, right? So we might want to include and combine multiple things. And when we have to do that, so that we can make sense of this, how am I going to do, in this case now, a ranking? How can I do a ranking of countries to decide, is the United States doing better than Canada? And maybe the US is better at education or maybe better at GDP growth, but Canada is better at healthcare. So how do I compare these items? It's a real difficult thing if I've got like 15 variables. One of them, one country is better, one of them, another country is better. How do I decide? So what I need to do is to come up with an index number. So an index number is a number that I create by combining different types of variables that reflect different types of priorities in order to give one number that gives a holistic picture, and I can then use that one number to compare different countries. So the Human Development Index, which we are going to go into further detail in the remaining videos, is one such index number. So to get an index number, there are a few things I have to do. First, I need to convert items to a single scale. Because going back to the varieties of numbers, what if what's your GDP is in one kind of measure, dollars, and then what if your life expectancy is at another kind of measure, how long do you live, and years, expected years of life, and what if your education is in yet another measure, how many years of schooling? Say 8th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade, how many years of schooling are being provided to people in this economy? So how am I supposed to put together one number which is about, are you producing well, the GDP, which is usually in billions of dollars, together with life expectancy, which is how many years do I expect you to live, which is usually somewhere in like number of years, 70 years, 80 years, 60 years, whatever, and years of schooling, which is again a completely different measure, because nobody can add 60 years life expectancy and use the same years for schooling, because nobody is expecting the government or policy to provide you with 60 years of schooling, right? So the first thing we have to do, once we decide what we want to include, decided what we want to include, and that's going to be a political discussion that we're going to come back to, because we are now deciding which numbers to notice. Am I going to notice life expectancy? Am I going to notice education? Am I going to notice housing? Am I going to notice GDP? What am I going to notice? Once I decide what to include, I then have to convert the numbers to a single scale. And then, when I combine them, this stands for numbers, right? So you have to combine the numbers. It's also a hashtag, but it stands for numbers. So that is what I call a weight. That is, how much importance, how much weight do I want to give, say, to GDP as more important or less important as compared to, say, health? Should I give more weight in the numbers to health? Or should I give more weight in the numbers to education? Should I give more weight in the numbers to the GDP? I can decide that they're all equally important and do 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Or I can decide, actually, I do believe education is a bit more important, so I'm going to count education twice as much as I'm going to count GDP. All right? So how much importance I give, how much weight I give to the numbers, tells me when I, having converted them all to a scale that's the same, I then have to take, the index is a combination of these numbers. So it's an average of some kind. And it's a weighted average, the weights reflecting the importance given to each item. And then finally, I have to decide what kind of average I'm going to use. We're going to spend a lot more time in future units on what are called measures of central tendency, different ways to think of averages. The arithmetic mean is one kind of average. When we do data, we're also going to look at things like mean, median, mode, the median being the mean being the arithmetic mean. But the arithmetic mean turns out to have a particular kind of problem in this situation. Because let us say I want to compare, I want to give more importance to education than I want to give to GDP. But my problem is correlation. Yeah, correlation. What that means is my numbers will tend to move together. So, for example, a country that's rich is also more likely to be able to afford more education for its citizens. And a country that's rich, probably people can access better healthcare services because they have the money, right? So, in that case, I am not able to figure out whether I am seeing a situation where there has been an actual capacity to increase life expectancy because of some actual economic policy, as compared to it's just because they're richer so they could do it, right? So this means in order for me to make something visible in policy, I'm going to finally have to decide what type of average or mean I'm going to use, now that I've got my weights, to combine these items. And in order to avoid the problem of correlation, which is not an issue, if it's not an issue, I could have just used a simple average, simple arithmetic mean. But because of the correlation problem, we are going to use a different kind of average called the geometric mean. So the geometric mean is a very particular kind of average that we are going to use when it comes to creating indices where the elements of the index move together or are correlated with each other.